I've been working night security at an abandoned office building for 3 months now. The pay is decent and honestly I thought it would be easy money, just sit around, watch some Netflix and make sure no one breaks in. But last week, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew about this place. The building has been empty for 2 years since the tech company that owned it went bankrupt. 12 floors of empty cubicles, conference rooms, and that eerie silence that only comes with truly abandoned places. My job is simple. Patrol each floor twice a night, check all doors and windows and report anything unusual. It started on Monday night around 2 a.m. during my first patrol. As I was checking the 7th floor, I heard what sounded like typing coming from one of the cubicles. Not unusual sounds for an old building, pipes settling, wind through loose windows, but this was definitely the rhythmic clicking of keyboard keys. I followed the sound to a cubicle in the northeast corner. The typing stopped the moment I rounded the corner, but the computer was on. The screen showed a document with a single line of text. "You're not supposed to be here." I immediately called my supervisor, but he just laughed it off. Probably forgot to shut it down properly when they cleared out. These old systems sometimes boot up randomly. He told me to turn it off and continue my patrol. Tuesday night, same time, same floor. This time it was a different cubicle and the message was longer. "You're not supposed to be here." Neither am I. But we're both trapped now. I took a photo with my phone, but when I looked at it later, the screen appeared completely black. I tried calling my supervisor again, but he didn't answer. Wednesday night, I almost didn't do the patrol. But I needed this job and part of me was curious. This time, when I got to the 7th floor, every computer was on. The soft blue glow filled the entire floor, and I could hear typing coming from everywhere at once. As I walked between the cubicles, text appeared on each screen as I passed. "Help me. I can't leave. They're coming back. Don't let them find you." I ran. I literally ran down 7 flights of stairs and didn't stop until I was in my security booth. I called in sick for the rest of the week. But I came back tonight. I had to know what was happening. This time I brought a voice recorder and a better flashlight. When I got to the 7th floor, everything was normal. Dark, quiet, peaceful. I was starting to think I had imagined everything when I heard it, not typing this time but voices. Whispered conversations coming from the conference room at the end of the hall. I crept closer and peered through the glass wall. The room was empty, but I could clearly hear people talking as if they were having a meeting. I pressed my ear to the door and heard fragments. "The deadline is tomorrow? We can't leave until it's finished. Been here so long. Who's the new guy?" That last comment made my blood freeze. I looked around, but I was still alone. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see a figure in a business suit walking toward me down the hallway. But here's the thing, the figure wasn't quite solid. I could see through him to the cubicles behind. He looked exactly like someone who would have worked here. Tired eyes, loosened tie, coffee stain on his shirt. When he saw me, he stopped and tilted his head. "Are you the new hire?" he asked in a voice that sounded like it was coming from underwater. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, watching as more figures began emerging from the cubicles. Men and women in various states of business attire, all with that same translucent quality, all looking at me with curious, exhausted expressions. "You shouldn't stay too late," one of them said, a woman with her hair in a messy bun. "We've been trying to finish this project for... How long has it been, Marcus?" The first figure, Marcus, shrugged. "Time doesn't work the same way here. Could be days, could be years. We just know we can't leave until the work is done." "What work?" I finally managed to ask. They all laughed, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. "We don't remember anymore. But it's important. So important that we can't leave even though..." Marcus gestured to himself, to his translucent form. That's when I understood. These weren't ghosts in the traditional sense. These were people who had worked themselves to death, literally. Stayed late night after night, weekend after weekend, until their bodies gave out, but their obligation to the company kept their spirits chained to their desks. The company went bankrupt, I told them. Everyone's gone. The building's been empty for 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marcus started laughing, really laughing, and the others joined in. It was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. The laughter of people who had just realized their entire existence was meaningless. 2 years, the woman whispered. We've been trying to complete projects for a company that doesn't exist anymore? The laughter stopped abruptly, and they all turned to look at me with expressions that had shifted from exhaustion to something much darker. You're going to help us leave, Marcus said, and it wasn't a request. I'm writing this from the security booth. It's 4 a.m. and I can hear them moving around upstairs. All 12 floors now, not just the 7th. They're in every room at every desk and they're all typing. The sound is constant now, like rain on a roof. My supervisor texted me an hour ago, "Great work lately. The building owners are so impressed with your dedication that they want to offer you a permanent position. Full benefits, great pay, but you need to work longer hours. Sometimes through the night, sometimes through the weekend. What do you say?" I'm looking at the text now and I realize I never gave him the building owner's contact information. How could they know about my work? Unless the typing upstairs has stopped. I can hear footsteps on the stairs. Multiple sets of footsteps, all coming down toward the lobby. My shift ends in 2 hours, but I don't think they're going to let me leave. If anyone finds this, don't take the night security job at the Meridian Tower. And if you work late hours anywhere, remember to go home. Don't let your dedication become your prison. The footsteps are getting closer. I can see Marcus through the security booth window. He's smiling and holding what looks like an employment contract. I think I understand now why they need me to stay. I need to share this story because I'm still not sure if I'm safe, and I want it documented somewhere in case something happens to me and my daughter. 3 months ago, I moved into a small rental house with my 6-year-old daughter Emma after my divorce was finalized. The place was perfect for our budget. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, and in a quiet neighborhood where Emma could walk to school. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, seemed nice enough, though he had this weird habit of dropping by unannounced to check on things. Emma loved the house immediately, especially her bedroom, which had a large window facing the backyard. But what really caught her attention was the dollhouse. It was sitting in the corner of her room when we moved in, and it was beautiful, a perfect miniature Victorian house, complete with tiny furniture, little dolls, and even working lights. When I asked Mr. Peterson about it, he said the previous tenant had left it behind and that Emma was welcome to play with it. At first, Emma was thrilled. She spent hours arranging the furniture and creating elaborate stories with the little dolls. There was a family of 4, a mother, father, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. She named them and gave them personalities the way kids do. But after a few weeks, I started noticing changes in Emma's behavior. She became secretive about her playtime, closing her bedroom door and speaking in whispers. When I asked her about it, she said she was helping the family with their problems. What kind of problems? I asked. The daddy doll is mean to the mommy doll, she said matter-of-factly, and the little girl doll is scared. She hides in the attic room. I thought it was just her processing our own family situation. Her father had been emotionally abusive, and I'd shielded her from most of it, but kids pick up on more than we realize. I made a mental note to keep an eye on her play and maybe talk to her school counselor. Then things got weird. I started finding the dolls in different positions than Emma had left them. She would carefully arrange them for a family dinner scene, and the next morning the father doll would be in a different room, and the mother and children would be huddled together in the corner. When I mentioned it to Emma, she looked troubled. I didn't move them, she said. They move by themselves at night. The little girl doll told me they do. Kids and their imaginations, right? But then I started paying closer attention to the dollhouse. The level of detail was incredible, not just the furniture and dolls, but the way everything was arranged. It looked like a real home lived in and personal. There were tiny family photos on the walls, miniature books on the shelves, even a small dog that Emma swore she'd never seen before. One night, I decided to test my growing suspicion. After putting Emma to bed, I took photos of the dollhouse from different angles, making sure to capture the exact positions of all the dolls and furniture. Then I waited. The next morning, everything had changed. The father doll was no longer in the living room where Emma had placed him. He was upstairs in the bedroom. The mother doll was in the kitchen and she appeared to be holding a tiny knife. The children were nowhere to be seen. I compared the photos I'd taken and there was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, had moved the dolls during the night. I confronted Emma again, but she was adamant that she hadn't touched the dollhouse after bedtime. The little girl doll is trying to tell me something, she said. She says her name is Sarah, and she used to live in this house. She says we're in danger. That's when I decided to do some research on the house's history. What I found made my blood run cold. 5 years ago, a family named the Hartmans had lived in our house. David and Linda Hartman with their 2 children, Michael 8 and Sarah 6. According to the police reports I found online, David Hartman had killed his wife and son before taking his own life. Sarah had survived by hiding in the attic crawl space for 3 days until neighbors called for a welfare check. Sarah Hartman would be 11 now, the same age as the little girl doll in Emma's dollhouse. I started asking around the neighborhood discreetly. Mrs. Chun from next door told me that Sarah had been placed with relatives in another state after the tragedy. Poor little thing, she said. She used to play with a dollhouse just like that one. Her father made it for her birthday right before. She trailed off. That night, I decided to watch the dollhouse. I set up my laptop in Emma's room after she fell asleep and recorded the dollhouse all night. In the morning, I reviewed the footage. At 3:17 a.m., the dolls began to move. Not quickly, not dramatically, just small, deliberate movements. The father doll walked from room to room, and wherever he went, the other dolls would hide. The mother doll kept trying to protect the children, moving between them and the father. It was like watching a silent play of domestic violence acted out in miniature. But here's the part that made me grab Emma and leave the house immediately. At 3:42 a.m., a new doll appeared in the dollhouse. A small girl with dark hair wearing a yellow dress. She looked exactly like Emma. The new doll stood in the living room for several minutes, then walked upstairs to where the Sarah doll was hiding. They seemed to have a conversation, their tiny heads turning toward each other, little gestures with their hands. Then the Sarah doll led the Emma doll to the attic room and showed her a small door I'd never noticed before. The door opened and both dolls climbed inside. The last thing I saw before the recording ended was the father doll discovering the open attic door and becoming agitated, moving frantically through the house, clearly searching for something. We're staying at my sister's now. I called the landlord to break our lease, but Mr. Peterson was strangely insistent that we return. The house needs you, he said, which was an odd way to put it. Some houses require specific occupants. I did more digging and found out that Mr. Peterson had owned the house for 20 years, but the Hartmans were just one of several families who had lived there. Each family seemed to have issues with domestic violence. Each family had at least one young daughter. And each family had left under mysterious or tragic circumstances. Emma keeps asking when we can go back for her dollhouse. She says Sarah is lonely and needs her help. Last night, she woke up screaming, saying that Sarah had visited her in a dream and warned her that the bad man is looking for new dolls. I've been getting texts from unknown numbers. Come home. The house is waiting. Sarah needs her friend. Yesterday, Emma drew a picture of our old house. In the picture, there were two little girls holding hands in an attic window. Behind them, barely visible, was the silhouette of a man with something in his hand. At the bottom of the picture, in Emma's careful handwriting, were the words, "Sarah says we have to go back and help the other girls." I'm scared that whatever is in that house, whether it's Sarah's spirit or something else entirely, is calling to my daughter. But I'm more scared of what might happen if we don't answer. I'm posting this because I need advice. Do I go back? Do I try to help Sarah find peace? Or do I keep running and hope that whatever is in that dollhouse can't follow us? Emma just came to me with another drawing. This time, it's a picture of a moving truck in front of my sister's house. In the truck, barely visible, is a small dollhouse. I think it might already be too late to run. I've been delivering food for various apps for about 2 years now. You see all kinds of weird stuff doing this job. Drunk people who forgot they ordered food, customers who give you directions to the wrong house, the occasional person who answers the door in their underwear. But what happened last week has me questioning reality itself. It started with what seemed like a normal order. Grubhub delivery to 1247 Maple Street, apartment 3B. Customer name, Jennifer Walsh. Order, 2 chicken dinners, extra sauce, Diet Coke. Instructions, leave at door, knock twice. Pretty standard stuff. The address led me to an older apartment complex in a part of town I didn't know well. The building was one of those brown brick ones from the 70s, the kind with narrow hallways and that specific old apartment smell. I found apartment 3B on the 3rd floor and knocked twice as requested. A woman answered almost immediately, like she'd been waiting right by the door. She was maybe mid-30s, blonde hair, wearing a blue sweater. She looked relieved when she saw me. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come." "Sorry for the wait," I said, handing her the bag. Traffic was pretty bad. She took the food and tipped me in cash, a 20, which was generous for a $30 order. As I was leaving, she called after me. "Gary? You'll be back tomorrow, right? Same time?" I turned around, confused. I hadn't told her my name, and we didn't have another delivery scheduled. "I'm sorry?" "Tomorrow night," she said. "You always come tomorrow night." Before I could ask what she meant, she'd closed the door. I stood there for a moment, puzzled, then headed back to my car. Weird customer, but the tip was good, so whatever. The next evening, around the same time, I got another Grubhub order. Same address, same apartment, same customer name, same order. Even the same instructions, leave at door, knock twice. I figured she just really liked the food and decided to order again. When I got to the apartment building, everything looked exactly the same. Same parking lot, same dimly lit hallway, same chipped paint on the door of 3B. I knocked twice and Jennifer Walsh answered immediately. Same blonde hair, same blue sweater, same relieved expression. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come. Sorry for the wait," I found myself saying automatically. Traffic was pretty bad. She took the food and handed me a $20 bill. As I turned to leave, she called after me again. "Gary, you'll be back tomorrow, right? Same time?" This time, the repetition was too obvious to ignore. "How do you know my name? And yes, this is exactly what you said yesterday." She looked confused. "Yesterday? No, this is the first time I've ordered from you guys. But you seem familiar. Have we met before?" I stared at her for a long moment. She seemed genuinely puzzled, not like she was messing with me. I decided to let it go and left. But the same thing happened the next night. And the night after that. Same order, same time, same apartment, same conversation, word for word. Jennifer Walsh answering the door in the same blue sweater, acting like it was the first time she'd ever seen me, but somehow knowing my name and expecting me to return the next day. By the fifth night, I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. I decided to test it. When she opened the door and said her usual line about being glad I'd come, I said something different. "Jennifer, we need to talk. This exact same thing happened yesterday and the day before and the day before that." She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "I'm sorry? I've never seen you before in my life. Is there a problem with my order? You're wearing the same sweater you wore yesterday." "This is my favorite sweater," she said, looking down at herself. "I wear it a lot. Is that weird?" I tried a different approach. "What day is it today?" "Tuesday," she said without hesitation. "What's the date?" She paused, looking confused. Tuesday, October? I'm not sure." "Why?" That's when I noticed something else. The hallway behind me was exactly the same as it had been every other night. Same scuff marks on the floor, same flickering fluorescent light, same door at the end of the hall slightly ajar with yellow light spilling out. I asked Jennifer if I could use her bathroom and she let me in. Her apartment was small but neat, living room with a couch and TV, small kitchen, bedroom door closed. What struck me was how temporary everything looked. Like a hotel room or a staging setup. There were no personal photos, no books, no clutter. Just basic furniture and a few generic decorations. In the bathroom, I looked at myself in the mirror and noticed something disturbing. I was wearing the same clothes I'd worn the first night I'd delivered to Jennifer. The same red polo shirt that I specifically remembered spilling mustard on the next day, but there was no stain. I checked my phone. It was Tuesday, October 15th. The same date as the first delivery. When I came out of the bathroom, Jennifer was sitting on her couch with the food containers open, eating. She looked up at me and smiled. "This is really good," she said. "I think I'll order the same thing tomorrow." "Jennifer," I said carefully, "what do you remember about yesterday?" She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "Yesterday? I was here, waiting for food. I'm always waiting for food." She looked troubled. "Actually, I can't remember yesterday very clearly. Or the day before. It's all kind of blurry." I sat down across from her. "What do you do for work?" She set down her fork and looked around the apartment like she'd never seen it before. "I don't know. I can't remember." "When did you move into this apartment?" "I don't know." "What's your last name?" She stared at me for a long moment. "Walsh. Jennifer Walsh. Right? That's what I always say." I pulled out my phone and showed her the delivery app. Her name, her address, her order. All exactly the same as every other night. "Jennifer, I think we're stuck in some kind of loop." As soon as I said it, everything in the apartment went quiet. The hum of the refrigerator stopped, the traffic noise from outside disappeared, even the fluorescent light in the hallway stopped flickering. Jennifer was frozen, fork still in her hand, staring at me with wide eyes. Then I heard it, a sound like someone rewinding an old cassette tape, but much louder. The world around me started to blur and shift like someone was shuffling through frames of a movie. I found myself back in my car, pulling into the parking lot of 1247 Maple Street. My phone showed a new Grubhub order. Jennifer Walsh, apartment 3B, 2 chicken dinners, extra sauce, Diet Coke. But this time, I noticed something different. In the delivery instructions after leave at door, knock twice, there was an additional line I'd never seen before. "Help me remember." I'm writing this sitting in my car outside her building. It's been 6 days now, Or maybe it's been the same day 6 times. I can't tell anymore. Each night I try something different, try to break the pattern, but it always ends the same way. Jennifer doesn't remember, the world resets, and I end up back here. But tonight I noticed something new. When I looked at the list of previous deliveries on my phone, there were dozens of deliveries to 1247 Maple Street. Not just from the past week, going back months. All to Jennifer Walsh. All the same order. I think I've been stuck in this loop for a lot longer than I realized. And I think Jennifer has been stuck even longer. The worst part? I'm starting to forget things too. What I had for breakfast this morning, what my apartment looks like, why I started doing delivery work in the first place. It's all getting fuzzy, like a dream you can't quite remember. I'm going to go up there one more time. I'm going to try to help Jennifer remember who she is, what happened to her, how we both got trapped in this endless Tuesday. If this post disappears, or if I stop updating, maybe that means I found a way out. Or maybe it means I finally forgot everything and became just another part of the loop. If anyone sees this and knows anything about 1247 Maple Street, or if you've ever delivered food to Jennifer Walsh, please let me know. I'm running out of ideas and I'm running out of time. The worst part about being stuck in a time loop isn't the repetition. It's the slow realization that maybe this isn't a glitch at all. Maybe this is exactly where you're supposed to be. I'm going to knock on her door now. Wish me luck. I run a small photography studio specializing in family portraits, and I've been doing this for about 8 years. You learn to read people pretty quickly in this job. The nervous first-time parents, the families going through divorce who are trying to hold it together for the camera, the grandparents who just want one good photo to leave behind. But 3 weeks ago, I had a session that's left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my work. The appointment was booked online by someone named Rebecca Torres for a family portrait session. Nothing unusual there. The booking form indicated it was for her husband David, and their twin daughters ages 7. They requested an evening session, which I don't usually do, but they offered to pay double my normal rate for the inconvenience. They arrived right on time at 7 p.m. Rebecca was a petite woman with dark hair, very polite but seemed nervous. David was tall, quiet, kept checking his watch. The twins, Maria and Sophia, were beautiful children but unusually well-behaved for 7-year-olds. They stood exactly where their parents positioned them and didn't speak unless spoken to. "We need these pictures today," Rebecca told me as I was setting up my equipment. "It's very important." "Special occasion?" I asked, making small talk while adjusting my lights. Rebecca and David exchanged a look. "You could say that," David replied. The session itself went smoothly, though there was something odd about the family dynamic. The parents kept whispering to each other in Spanish, and whenever I tried to engage the children in conversation to get natural smiles, they would look to their parents first before responding. But here's where it gets strange. When I reviewed the photos later that night, there were inconsistencies I couldn't explain. In some shots, the family looked perfectly normal, a happy family of 4 smiling at the camera. But in others, taken just seconds apart, the lighting seemed different, the shadows fell at wrong angles, and the expressions on their faces looked off. Not fake smile off, but something deeper. Like they were afraid of something just outside the camera's view. In one particular photo, I noticed something in the background that hadn't been there during the shoot. My studio has a plain white backdrop, but in this image, there appeared to be a doorway behind the family, slightly out of focus but definitely there. Through the doorway, I could make out what looked like a hallway with peeling wallpaper. I checked the other photos from that session. The doorway appeared in about half of them, always in slightly different positions, always with that same dim hallway visible beyond it. The next morning, I called Rebecca to discuss the photos and mention the technical issues I was seeing. The number went straight to voicemail, a generic recording, not a personalized message. I tried again several times throughout the day with the same result. I decided to do some research. Rebecca Torres had paid with a credit card, so I had her information. But when I tried to look her up online, I couldn't find any trace of a Rebecca Torres with the address she'd given. The address itself led to a vacant lot where a house had been demolished 2 years prior. That's when I started digging deeper into the photos themselves. I'm pretty good with Photoshop and photo analysis, so I began examining the images more closely. What I found made my hands shake. The metadata on the photos showed they were taken at my studio on the date of the session, but the timestamp was wrong. According to the file data, the photos were taken at 11:47 p.m., nearly 5 hours after the family had left my studio. But more disturbing was what I found when I enhanced the images of that mysterious doorway. In the hallway beyond, barely visible in the shadows, were additional figures. People who hadn't been in my studio during the session. I could make out at least 3 other individuals, 2 adults and what looked like another child. They appeared to be watching the family, standing in the hallway like they were waiting for something. I enhanced the image further and nearly dropped my laptop. One of the figures in the hallway was wearing a police uniform. I spent the next 2 days obsessively researching the Torres family name combined with the city where my studio is located. Finally, I found something in the local newspaper archives from 18 months ago. Local family dies in house fire, arson suspected. The article was about a family of 4, David and Rebecca Torres and their twin daughters Maria and Sofia, ages 7, who had died in a house fire. The fire had been ruled arson, and the prime suspect was Rebecca's ex-husband, Miguel Santos, who had been fighting for custody of the twins. Miguel Santos had died in a shootout with police 3 days after the fire. The officer who shot him was named Detective James Morrison. I stared at the newspaper photo of the Torres family. It was definitely the same people who had been in my studio, but they had been dead for over a year. I went back to the enhanced studio photos and looked more closely at the figures in the hallway. The man in the police uniform looked remarkably similar to Detective Morrison from the newspaper photos I'd found online. That night, I stayed late at my studio, hoping to understand what had happened. I set up my camera in the exact same position as during the Torres session and took several test shots of the empty space where they had stood. At 11:47 p.m., the exact timestamp from the original photos, my camera began taking pictures on its own. I watched in horror as my equipment captured image after image of the empty studio, but when I reviewed them, they weren't empty. The Torres family was there in every shot, posed exactly as they had been during our session. But now I could see the fear in their faces more clearly, and I could see what they were afraid of. In the doorway behind them stood Miguel Santos, a man I recognized from the newspaper photos. He was holding something in his hand that reflected the camera flash. Behind him, Detective Morrison watched from the shadows of the hallway. The photos continued for exactly 43 minutes, the duration of our original session. In the final image, the entire Torres family was looking directly at the camera, directly at me with expressions of desperate pleading. Rebecca was mouthing words I couldn't quite make out, but her hands were pressed against what looked like glass, as if she were trapped behind a window. I've been researching the history of my studio building. It was built on the site of the original Torres family home, the one that burned down. My studio occupies the exact space where their living room used to be. I think the Torres family has been trying to tell their story, to have their final family portrait taken in the place where they died. But I also think Miguel Santos and Detective Morrison are trapped here too, doomed to replay the final moments of their lives. The photos are still on my camera, but when I try to show them to other people, they appear blank. It's like the images are only visible to me. I've been getting calls from an unknown number. When I answer, I hear children laughing and a woman's voice saying, "Thank you for the beautiful pictures." Last night, I found a manila envelope slipped under my studio door. Inside were prints of all the photos from the Torres session, but these versions were different. The family looked peaceful, happy, and the mysterious doorway was gone. At the bottom of each photo, in Rebecca's handwriting, was a single word, "Finally." I think they got what they needed. Their final family portrait, taken in the place where their lives ended, proof that they existed, that they were loved, that they were together. But I'm not sure the story is over. Yesterday, I got another online booking for a family portrait session. The customer name is Miguel Santos, and the session is scheduled for tomorrow night at 11:47 p.m. I'm thinking about not showing up. But then again, maybe everyone deserves to have their picture taken, even the dead. Especially the dead. I'm a college student who babysits to make extra money, and I've been doing it for about 3 years. I've had some weird experiences, kids who claim to see imaginary friends, strange noises in old houses, the usual stuff that comes with being alone with children at night. But what happened 2 months ago at the Whitmore House has made me seriously consider quitting babysitting altogether. Mrs. Whitmore contacted me through a babysitting app, asking if I could watch her daughter Emma, age 6, on a Saturday night while she and her husband attended a wedding. The pay was excellent, $25 an hour for what she estimated would be about 6 hours. Emma was described as a quiet child who goes to bed early and shouldn't give you any trouble. The Whitmore House was in an upscale suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where every lawn is perfectly manicured and every house looks like it came from a magazine. When I arrived at 6 p.m., Mrs. Whitmore greeted me at the door. She was elegantly dressed for the wedding, but she seemed anxious, almost frantic. "Thank you so much for coming on short notice," she said, ushering me inside. "Emma is in her room playing. She's had dinner and she should be ready for bed by 8:30. The house was beautiful, hardwood floors, expensive furniture, family photos everywhere. But something felt off about it. The photos, I realized, were all of Mrs. Whitmore and her husband. I didn't see any pictures of Emma. "Where's Mr. Whitmore?" I asked, since only one car was in the driveway. "Oh, he went ahead to the venue to help set up," Mrs. Whitmore said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "I'll meet him there." She gave me a quick rundown of Emma's bedtime routine and emergency contact information, then practically ran out the door, calling, "We'll be back by midnight," over her shoulder. I found Emma in what I assumed was her bedroom, though it was strangely sparse for a 6-year-old's room. Just a bed, a dresser, and a few toys scattered on the floor. Emma herself was exactly as described, quiet, well-behaved, with long blonde hair and pale blue eyes. She was coloring in a book when I introduced myself. "Hi Emma, I'm Sarah. I'm going to hang out with you tonight while your parents are at the wedding." Emma looked up at me with those pale eyes and smiled. "I know who you are," she said softly. "Mommy told me you were coming." The first few hours went smoothly. Emma was indeed quiet, content to color or play with her dolls while I did homework on the couch. At 8:30, I helped her brush her teeth and get into her pajamas. She climbed into bed without any fuss. "Will you read me a story?" she asked. I looked around the sparse room. "Where are your books, sweetie?" "I don't have any books," Emma said matter-of-factly. "But I can tell you a story instead." Before I could respond, she launched into the most disturbing tale I'd ever heard from a child. It was about a little girl who lived in a house where bad things happened, where people came and went but never stayed, where the little girl had to be very, very quiet or else the monsters would find her. "Emma," I interrupted gently, "that's a pretty scary story. Maybe we should think of something happier?" She tilted her head. "But it's not scary. It's just what happened." I tucked her in, turned off the light, and went back to the living room, feeling unsettled. That's when I decided to look around the house more carefully. What I found made my blood run cold. In the master bedroom, I opened the closet to find only men's clothes. No women's clothing at all. The bathroom had one toothbrush, one razor, men's toiletries only. Every family photo I examined more closely showed the same thing. A man, sometimes with different women, but never the same woman twice. And never with a child. I crept back to Emma's room and slowly opened the door. The bed was empty. "Emma?" I whispered, my heart pounding. "I'm right here," came her voice from the closet. I found her huddled in the corner, trembling. "Emma, what's wrong? Why are you hiding?" "He's coming back," she whispered. "He always comes back when the babysitters are here. Mommy tries to keep me safe, but she can't always stay." "Who's coming back, honey?" "The man who lives here. He's not my daddy. My real daddy went away. But this man, he likes when babysitters come over. He tells them I'm his daughter, but I'm not. Mommy makes me pretend or else he gets angry." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. No service. The landline had been disconnected. I checked. That's when I heard a car door slam outside. "He's here," Emma breathed. "Hide me. Please hide me." I looked out the window and saw a man walking up the driveway. Not well dressed like he'd been at a wedding. Casual clothes, walking with purpose. This wasn't Mr. Whitmore coming home from a wedding. This was someone else entirely. I grabbed Emma and we hid in the bathroom, locking the door. I heard him enter the house, heard him calling, "Hello? Sarah? Where are you girls?" Through the bathroom window, I managed to call 911 on my phone when I got one bar of service. I whispered our situation to the dispatcher. The police arrived within minutes. Turns out, the man had been running this scheme for months, using dating apps to meet single mothers, convincing them to let him borrow their children for fake babysitting gigs that were actually setups for whatever sick purposes he had planned. Emma's real mother had been frantically searching for her daughter for 3 days. The scariest part? They found evidence that suggested I wasn't the first babysitter to answer these fake jobs. But I was apparently the first one to call the police. Emma was reunited with her real mother that night. The man, whose real name I never learned, was arrested on multiple charges. The Mrs. Whitmore who had hired me was never found. I still babysit, but now I always meet the parents beforehand, verify their address, and make sure multiple people know exactly where I'll be. Emma's story could have ended very differently if she hadn't been brave enough to warn me. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I work night shifts at a hospital and I usually drive myself to work. But last month my car was in the shop, so I had to rely on rideshares to get to and from my 12-hour shifts. What happened on one of those rides home has made me paranoid about using rideshare apps ever since. It was 7 a.m. on a Thursday morning. I was exhausted after a particularly brutal shift in the ICU. We'd lost 2 patients, and I was emotionally drained. All I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and sleep. I ordered an Uber from the hospital's main entrance. The app showed my driver was Marcus, driving a gray Honda Accord, license plate ending in 347. ETA, 4 minutes. I waited by the curb, half asleep on my feet. A gray Honda pulled up exactly when the app said my ride would arrive. I was so tired that I barely glanced at the license plate. The driver rolled down his window. "Sarah?" he called out. That should have been my first red flag. My name in the app is actually S. Mitchell. I never use my full first name for safety reasons. But I was so exhausted that I just nodded and got in the back seat. "Long night?" the driver asked as I buckled my seatbelt. "Yeah, 12-hour shift," I mumbled, leaning my head against the window. The driver didn't start driving right away. Instead, he adjusted his rearview mirror to look at me. "You work at the hospital?" "Mum." I had my eyes closed, not really paying attention to where we were going. After about 10 minutes, I realized we should have been at my apartment already. I opened my eyes and looked around. We were on a highway I didn't recognize, heading away from the city. "Excuse me," I said, sitting up straight. "I think you made a wrong turn. My apartment is on Maple Street." The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "I know where we're going." That's when the full gravity of the situation hit me. I pulled out my phone to check the Uber app. The trip was still showing as in progress, but according to the GPS, my driver Marcus was still at the hospital. The real Marcus, driving the real gray Honda Accord with the license plate ending in 347. I was in the wrong car. My heart started racing. "Stop the car. Let me out. Now." "Can't do that, sweetheart. We're on the highway." I looked at the door handles. The child safety locks were engaged. I was trapped. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" "I've been watching you," he said casually, like he was discussing the weather. "You work nights, Tuesday through Thursday. You live alone in that little apartment on Maple Street. You order ride shares when your car's in the shop." The fact that he knew my schedule, my living situation, everything, it was terrifying. This had been planned. You take the same route to work, same time every night. Very predictable. Makes things easy. I was frantically texting 911 from my phone, trying to be discreet. But my hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. "The thing about night shift workers," he continued, "is that no one expects to hear from them during the day. You could disappear for 12, maybe 18 hours before anyone would even think to look for you." I managed to send my location to 911 with a message, "Kidnapped in gray Honda, help." I also sent the same message to my roommate and my charge nurse. The driver must have noticed me on my phone because he reached back and snatched it from my hands. "Can't have you doing that," he said, throwing my phone out the window. But it was too late. My messages had already been sent. We drove for another 20 minutes before I heard sirens. The driver started cursing and driving erratically, taking exit ramps and trying to lose the police cars that were now following us. "This is your fault," he screamed at me. "You ruined everything." The chase ended when he lost control, taking a curve too fast. The car spun out and crashed into a guardrail. I was bruised and shaken but not seriously injured. The driver was unconscious. When the police pulled me from the wreckage, I learned the full scope of what I'd narrowly escaped. The man had been stalking several night shift workers from different hospitals around the city. He'd learned their routines, then would position himself near popular rideshare pickup spots, impersonating drivers to lure victims into his car. They found restraints, duct tape, and other items in his trunk that I don't want to think about. They also found a journal where he'd been planning what he was going to do with me, written in detail that still gives me nightmares. The scariest part? He'd been following this pattern for months. I wasn't his first target, but thankfully I was his last. Now I always verify the license plate, check the driver's photo, and never get in a car until I confirm with the app that this is definitely my assigned driver. I also always sit behind the passenger seat so I can see the driver's profile, and I keep the app open during the entire ride. The man was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. During the trial, I learned that he'd been watching me specifically for over 2 months, learning my patterns, waiting for the perfect opportunity. The reason he targeted night shift workers? He correctly assumed we'd be tired and less vigilant after long shifts. He was almost right. Trust your instincts, verify your ride, and never get in a car just because it's the right color and the driver knows your name. Anyone can learn that information if they're determined enough. I've been working as a delivery driver for about 5 years. Mostly packages, sometimes food delivery. In that time, I've delivered to some weird places and met some strange people. But what happened last month has made me seriously consider finding a new line of work. It started with what seemed like a routine delivery. I got an order for a package delivery to an address in a rural area about 45 minutes outside of town. The package was small but heavy, about the size of a shoebox, and the delivery instructions were oddly specific. Deliver between 10 p.m. and midnight only. Do not deliver during daylight hours. Ring doorbell 3 times, wait exactly 30 seconds, then leave package on doorstep and drive away immediately. Do not wait for recipient to answer door. The instructions were weird, but the tip was $200 for what should have been a $20 delivery, so I wasn't going to ask questions. Night deliveries aren't uncommon in my line of work. Sometimes people work strange hours or want to avoid nosy neighbors. The address led me down a long, winding dirt road that seemed to go on forever. No streetlights, no other houses nearby, just dense woods on both sides. My GPS kept cutting out, but I eventually found the house, a small, rundown place that looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. There were no lights on in the house, but there was a car in the driveway, so I figured someone was home. I grabbed the package and walked up to the front door. As instructed, I rang the doorbell 3 times and started counting to 30. That's when I heard voices inside the house. Not conversation, arguing. Angry, hushed voices that seemed to be getting more heated by the second. At exactly 30 seconds, I placed the package on the doorstep and turned to walk back to my van. But as I reached for my door handle, I heard something that made me freeze. A woman's voice screaming, "No. Please don't make me." Then a man's voice, angry and demanding, "You know what happens if you don't cooperate." Then silence. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. The delivery instructions had been clear: leave immediately. But something was obviously wrong inside that house. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but I had no service. The rural location was completely dead for cell coverage. That's when the front door opened. A man stepped out, tall, maybe mid-40s, wearing dark clothes. He looked at me standing by my van, then looked at the package on his doorstep. "You the delivery driver?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Just dropped off your package as requested." He picked up the package and examined it. "This is heavier than I expected." I had no idea what was in the package. I never asked, and customers never volunteered that information. But his comment seemed strange. "Everything okay in there?" I asked, nodding toward the house. I thought I heard someone yelling. His expression changed immediately. The casual demeanor disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You heard wrong," he said flatly. "Nothing going on here except me receiving a delivery." "Right," I said, getting into my van. "Well, have a good night." But as I started to drive away, I saw something in my side mirror that made my blood run cold. Another person had come to the front door, a woman, and she was clearly in distress. Even from a distance, I could see that her hands appeared to be bound behind her back. I drove down the dirt road until I was out of sight of the house, then pulled over and tried my phone again. Still no service. I had to drive almost 10 minutes back toward town before I got enough signal to call 911. The police response was immediate. They told me to meet them at a gas station near the highway and wait while they investigated the house. What they found there still haunts me. The package I delivered contained restraints, duct tape, and what the police described as tools. The man had been holding 2 women against their will in the basement of that house. The woman I'd seen at the door had somehow gotten free from her restraints and was trying to escape when I heard the commotion. The man had been operating a human trafficking operation, using online delivery services to have supplies delivered to various remote locations. He'd specifically request night deliveries to reduce the chances of witnesses, and he paid large tips to ensure drivers wouldn't ask questions or deviate from his specific instructions. The police found evidence that this had been going on for over a year. Dozens of deliveries to different remote addresses, all with similar instructions, all with unusually large tips. The 2 women were rescued and eventually recovered, though I can't imagine how long it will take them to truly heal from what they experienced. The man was arrested and charged with multiple felonies including kidnapping, human trafficking, and assault. The most disturbing part? During the investigation, police discovered that several other delivery drivers had made similar deliveries to the same network of addresses over the past year. But because of the specific instructions to leave immediately, most drivers had never witnessed anything suspicious. I was just unlucky enough, or maybe lucky enough, to be there at the exact moment when one of the victims was trying to escape. The case made me realize how delivery drivers can unknowingly become part of criminal operations. We're trained not to ask questions about packages or delivery instructions, to just follow the customer's requests and collect our payment. Now I pay much closer attention to unusual delivery requests, especially ones involving remote locations, night deliveries, and abnormally large tips. I also make sure to report anything suspicious to both my company and the police. The man was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The delivery company implemented new policies about suspicious delivery requests, and I installed a dashcam in my van that records everything just in case. Sometimes following instructions exactly as given isn't the right thing to do. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts even when it means breaking protocol. If I hadn't stopped to call the police that night, those women might never have been found. Dr. Sarah Chen had always prided herself on her perfect memory. As a neurologist specializing in Alzheimer's research, she could recall every patient's history, every conversation, every detail with frightening precision. Her colleagues often joked that she was a walking medical encyclopedia. That's why the first forgotten appointment felt like a crack in her carefully constructed world. "Dr. Chen, you missed the Morrison consultation," her assistant mentioned casually. Sarah stared at her calendar, seeing the appointment she had no memory of scheduling. She dismissed it as stress. Too many late nights, too many patients slipping into the darkness of dementia while she fought desperately to pull them back. But the cracks widened. She forgot a patient's name mid-sentence during rounds. She drove to the hospital and momentarily couldn't remember why she was there. Most disturbing, she began encountering patients in the hallway who greeted her warmly while she stared at them like strangers. Sarah began documenting her memory lapses with clinical precision, approaching her own deteriorating mind like a case study. The pattern that emerged defied everything she knew about neuroscience. Her memory loss wasn't random, it was surgical, selective. She would forget specific patients, specific conversations, while retaining perfect recall of everything else from the same day. But strangest of all, she didn't feel like she was forgetting things. She felt like the memories had never existed at all. When Dr. Martinez showed her consultation notes written in her own handwriting for a patient she couldn't remember, Sarah felt the first tendrils of real terror. "We spent 3 hours on this case," Martinez insisted. "You were passionate about the treatment plan." Sarah stared at her own words, describing observations she had apparently made but couldn't recall. It was like discovering evidence of a parallel life she had lived but never experienced. The medical test came back normal. Her brain showed no signs of disease, no structural abnormalities. That's when she noticed the connection in her journal entries. Every forgotten memory involved patients with severe dementia. And those patients were getting better. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell had been in the final stages of Alzheimer's when Sarah first treated her. According to her forgotten notes, the elderly woman hadn't recognized her own daughter in months. But when Sarah visited her now, having no memory of their previous relationship, she found a woman who was sharp, coherent, and living independently. "Dr. Chen," Mrs. Hartwell said with perfect clarity, "I've been hoping you'd visit. I wanted to thank you." "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else," Sarah replied. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes filled with concern. "Dear, you held my hand when I couldn't remember my daughter's name. You were there when I forgot how to dress myself. You saved my mind." Sarah felt ice in her veins. She had no memory of any of this, but Mrs. Hartwell's recollection was vivid, detailed, memories that should have been lost forever to Alzheimer's disease. The truth revealed itself like a tumor growing in her consciousness. Every patient whose case she had forgotten was experiencing miraculous recovery. Their lost memories were returning, their minds restored. And with each patient's improvement, Sarah lost more of herself. She was becoming a conduit, a repository for lost memories. The forgotten thoughts of dementia patients weren't disappearing, they were flowing into her mind, and in exchange her own memories were flowing back to restore their damaged brains. But the trade wasn't equal. For every patient memory she absorbed, she lost dozens of her own. She was being hollowed out, her identity sacrificed to preserve others. Sarah tried to stop treating patients, tried to break the connection. But it was too late. The process had become involuntary, unstoppable. She could feel memories slipping away, not just professional ones now but personal ones. She forgot her wedding day. She forgot her parents' faces. She forgot her own childhood. Each lost memory felt like a small death, a piece of her soul vanishing into the void where she stored the rescued thoughts of others. In her research, she discovered the horrifying truth: she wasn't the first. Throughout history, other memory specialists had experienced the same phenomenon. Doctors who had devoted their lives to treating dementia, only to lose themselves in return. Most had been dismissed as cases of early-onset Alzheimer's, their colleagues never recognizing the pattern. Sarah realized she was part of an ancient cycle, a cosmic balance. Those who fought to preserve memory were destined to sacrifice their own. She was a memory keeper, a guardian ensuring that human recollection endured, even at the cost of her own existence. In her final coherent moment, Sarah understood her purpose. She was the vessel that held lost thoughts, the sanctuary where forgotten memories found refuge. She was disappearing so that others could remember. Dr. Martinez found her 3 days later, sitting in her office, staring at a journal filled with handwriting she didn't recognize. Sarah had no memory of being a doctor, no recollection of her patients, no awareness of her own name. But across the city, elderly patients were calling their children with perfect clarity. Dementia sufferers were recognizing their spouses for the first time in years. Lost memories were being restored, saved by a woman who no longer remembered her own name. The memory keeper had fulfilled her purpose, even as she lost herself in the process. And somewhere else, another neurologist specializing in memory disorders was beginning to notice small lapses in their own perfect recall. The cycle continued as it always had, as it always would. Emma had always prided herself on being observant. It was a skill that served her well as a freelance journalist, but it became a curse when she moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oak Street. The house was perfect, a charming 2-story colonial with a white picket fence and a garden that the previous owner had maintained beautifully. What she hadn't anticipated was her neighbor, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson lived in the house directly across from hers, and from the moment Emma moved in, she felt his eyes on her. At first, she dismissed it as normal curiosity about the new neighbor. People were naturally interested in changes to their street after all. But as days turned into weeks, the watching became more intense, more deliberate. Every morning when Emma opened her curtains, Mr. Thompson would be standing at his front window, coffee mug in hand, staring directly at her house. When she left for work, he'd be on his porch, pretending to read the newspaper but tracking her every movement with his pale blue eyes. When she returned home in the evenings, there he was again, sometimes standing in his yard under the pretense of watering plants that never seemed to need water. Emma tried to be friendly at first. She waved whenever she saw him, even attempted to strike up conversations over the fence. But Mr. Thompson would only nod curtly and retreat into his house, as if caught doing something he shouldn't. His behavior made her skin crawl, but she told herself she was overreacting. Maybe the man was just lonely, or perhaps he had some form of social anxiety. The situation escalated 3 weeks after she'd moved in. Emma woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and noticed a strange glow coming through her bedroom window. She peered through the blinds and felt her blood run cold. Mr. Thompson was standing in his yard, holding a flashlight, pointing it directly at her house. The beam was focused on her bedroom window. She watched, frozen with a mixture of fear and disbelief, as he slowly moved the light across her windows, pausing at each one as if cataloging what he could see inside. When the light lingered on her bedroom window, Emma ducked below the sill, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it across the street. The next morning, Emma called the police. The officer who took her statement was polite but clearly skeptical. "Standing in your own yard isn't illegal, ma'am," he explained. "Unless he's actually trespassing on your property or making threats, there's not much we can do. Maybe try talking to him directly?" But Emma couldn't bring herself to confront Mr. Thompson. Every interaction she'd attempted had left her feeling more unsettled than before. Instead, she invested in blackout curtains and a security system, hoping that would deter whatever obsession was driving her neighbor's behavior. The watching continued, but now it felt more sinister. Mr. Thompson began timing his outdoor activities to coincide with hers. When she gardened, he'd appear with his own garden tools. When she checked her mail, he'd emerge to check his. It was as if he was studying her routine, learning her patterns. One evening, Emma discovered why. She was working late in her home office, which faced the side of Mr. Thompson's house, when she noticed something odd. There was a faint light coming from what should have been a blank wall. Curious and increasingly concerned, she grabbed a pair of binoculars she used for birdwatching and focused on the spot. What she saw made her stomach lurch. There was a small window in Mr. Thompson's wall, a window that hadn't been there when she'd first viewed the house weeks ago. And through that window she could see into a room that shouldn't exist. The walls were covered with photographs. Hundreds of them. All of her. Pictures of her leaving for work, returning home, gardening, checking mail, even sleeping, taken through her windows despite the curtains she thought provided privacy. Some photos were taken with a telephoto lens from various angles around her house. Others appeared to be taken from much closer, as if he'd been standing right outside her windows. Emma stumbled backward from her window, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. This time, when she called the police, she had evidence. The officers who responded took her report seriously, and within an hour, they were knocking on Mr. Thompson's door with a search warrant. What they found inside his house was beyond disturbing. The room Emma had glimpsed was just the beginning. Mr. Thompson had converted his entire basement into a surveillance center dedicated to watching her. Multiple monitors showed live feeds from cameras he'd somehow planted around her property. File cabinets contained detailed logs of her daily activities, complete with timestamps and behavioral observations. There were even floor plans of her house, annotated with notes about her routines and habits. But the most chilling discovery was a detailed plan titled Integration Protocol. Mr. Thompson had been methodically studying Emma's life with the intention of gradually inserting himself into it. The plan outlined how he would create coincidental meetings, establish himself as a helpful neighbor, and slowly become indispensable to her daily routine. The final phase of his plan involved staging a break-in at her house while he was conveniently available to offer her a place to stay, temporarily. Mr. Thompson was arrested that night on charges of stalking, criminal surveillance, and trespassing. As the police led him away, he turned to look at Emma one last time. Instead of anger or shame, his expression held something far more unsettling, disappointment, as if she had somehow failed to appreciate the effort he'd put into watching her. The house across the street remained empty for months after Mr. Thompson's arrest. Emma eventually moved away, unable to shake the feeling that somewhere, someone else might be watching, waiting, and planning. She never found out what happened to all those photographs, and sometimes in the middle of the night, she still wondered if Mr. Thompson had shared them with others who might continue his obsession. The new owners of her old house later discovered additional cameras hidden in the trees around the property, cameras that the police had somehow missed. By then, Emma was long gone, but she often wondered if her replacement neighbor had any idea they were being watched too. When the Ashworth family moved into the house next door, Miranda thought she'd won the neighbor lottery. They were everything she'd hoped for in neighbors: quiet, clean, and incredibly polite. David Ashworth was a tall, distinguished man who worked from home as some kind of consultant. His wife, Helen, was a picture-perfect homemaker who maintained their garden with obsessive precision. Their twin daughters, Emma and Lily, both around 8 years old, were angelic children who never seemed to make noise or cause trouble. At first, Miranda was simply impressed by how well-behaved and organized the Ashworth family was. Their lawn was always perfectly manicured, their house perpetually spotless, and their children impeccably dressed in matching outfits that looked like they'd stepped out of a 1950s catalog. They waved politely when they saw her, but never seemed interested in lengthy conversations, which Miranda initially respected as a preference for privacy. The first sign that something was off came about a month after they'd moved in. Miranda was working in her garden when she heard crying from next door. It was soft at first, barely audible over the sound of her lawnmower, but it grew louder and more desperate. She turned off the mower and listened carefully. The crying was definitely coming from the Ashworth house, and it sounded like one of the little girls. Miranda approached the fence separating their yards and called out, "Is everything okay over there?" The crying stopped immediately as if someone had flipped a switch. A moment later, Helen Ashworth appeared in her backyard, smiling brightly and carrying a basket of laundry. "Oh, hello, Miranda," Helen called out cheerfully. "Beautiful day for gardening, isn't it?" "I thought I heard crying," Miranda said, studying Helen's face for any sign of distress. Helen's smile never wavered. "Crying? Oh, you must have heard the television. The girls are watching a sad movie inside. You know how emotional children can be about their cartoons." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about Helen's demeanor bothered Miranda. Her smile seemed forced, and she kept glancing back at the house as if worried about being seen talking to Miranda for too long. Over the next few weeks, Miranda began paying closer attention to her neighbors. She noticed that the family's routine was rigidly structured. Every day at exactly 7 a.m., David would emerge from the house in a perfectly pressed suit and walk to his car. At 7:15, Helen would appear with the twins, who were always dressed identically, and walk them to the end of the driveway where a school bus would pick them up. Helen would then spend the morning working in the garden, take a break for lunch at precisely noon, and return to outdoor chores until the children came home at 3:30. The schedule never varied. Not once. Even on weekends, the family maintained the same rigid timing for their activities. They would emerge for exactly 1 hour of family time in the backyard at 4 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, during which they would sit in a circle and appear to be having a conversation, though Miranda never heard any laughter or animated discussion. The second incident occurred on a rainy Thursday evening. Miranda was reading in her living room when she heard a loud thud from next door, followed by what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor. Then came the crying again, more desperate this time and definitely from one of the children. The sound was muffled as if it was coming from inside the house, but it was persistent enough that Miranda could hear it clearly through the walls. She waited for someone to comfort the crying child, but the sound continued for nearly 20 minutes before suddenly stopping. The abrupt silence was somehow more unsettling than the crying had been. The next morning, Miranda made a point of being outside when the twins walked to the school bus. She waved at Emma and Lily, and while Emma gave her a small wave back, Miranda noticed something that made her blood run cold. There was a dark bruise on Emma's wrist, barely visible beneath the long sleeves of her pristine white dress. "Emma, honey," Miranda called out gently, "how did you hurt your arm?" Emma looked back at her house where Helen was standing in the doorway watching. The little girl's eyes were wide with what looked like fear. "I fell down," she said quietly, pulling her sleeve down further to cover the bruise. But Miranda had seen enough bruises in her work as a former nurse to know the difference between an injury from a fall and one caused by someone grabbing a child's arm too hard. The bruise on Emma's wrist was clearly in the shape of adult fingers. That evening, Miranda called Child Protective Services. She felt guilty making the report based on suspicions and one bruise, but something about the Ashworth family's perfect facade felt deeply wrong. The social worker who took her call was professional but explained that they would need more substantial evidence before they could investigate. Determined to help the children if they were indeed being abused, Miranda began documenting everything she could observe about the family's behavior. She kept a log of their rigid schedule, noted instances when she heard crying or unusual sounds, and watched for any other signs of distress from the children. What she discovered was more disturbing than she'd anticipated. The family's perfection wasn't just unusual, it was unnatural. The children never played like normal kids. They never laughed loudly, never ran around the yard, never showed any signs of spontaneous behavior. When they were outside, they moved with mechanical precision, as if following choreographed instructions. One Saturday afternoon, Miranda was watching from her upstairs window when she saw something that confirmed her worst fears. The family was having their scheduled family time in the backyard, sitting in their usual circle. But from her elevated vantage point, Miranda could see what looked like a script or set of cards in Helen's hands. She was reading from it, and the children were responding with what appeared to be memorized lines. It wasn't a family conversation. It was a performance, staged for the benefit of anyone who might be watching. That night, Miranda heard the crying again, louder and more desperate than before. This time she also heard David's voice raised in anger, though she couldn't make out the words. The crying turned to screaming, then abruptly stopped. The sudden silence that followed was the most terrifying sound Miranda had ever heard. She called the police. When the officers arrived at the Ashworth house, everything appeared normal. David answered the door in his perfect suit, despite it being nearly midnight. Helen stood behind him with her perpetual smile, and the twins appeared in matching nightgowns, looking tired but unharmed. The officers found no evidence of abuse, no signs of disturbance, and the family's explanation for the noise, that they'd been moving furniture, seemed plausible. But Miranda noticed something the police didn't. When little Lily had appeared at the door, her hair was slightly mussed on one side as if she'd been lying down for a while. And there was something in her eyes, a blank, distant look that Miranda had seen before in severely traumatized children. The next morning, the Ashworth house was empty. Sometime during the night, the family had packed up and left without a word to anyone. The moving truck must have come in the early hours of the morning, because by the time Miranda woke up, there was no trace that the perfect family had ever lived there. Miranda never found out what had really been happening in that house, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd failed those little girls. She'd seen the signs, reported her concerns, but hadn't been able to save them from whatever nightmare they were living. Months later, she read a news article about a family matching the Ashworths' description who had been arrested in another state for running an elaborate child exploitation ring. The parents had been forcing their children to participate in disturbing online content, maintaining a facade of perfection while subjecting them to unimaginable abuse behind closed doors. Miranda never knew for certain if it was the same family, but she kept the article in her desk drawer as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous neighbors are the ones who seem too perfect to be true. Jack had always been a heavy sleeper. It was a trait that had served him well during his years in the military and later when he worked night shifts at the factory. So when he first heard the scratching sounds coming from beneath his house, he assumed it was just mice or maybe a raccoon that had found its way under the crawl space. The farmhouse he'd inherited from his uncle was old, built in the 1940s, and it wouldn't be unusual for small animals to make their homes in the space between the ground and the floorboards. The scratching happened mostly at night, a rhythmic scraping sound that seemed to move from room to room beneath the house. Jack's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had mentioned that she'd been hearing similar sounds coming from her basement, which shared a foundation wall with Jack's crawl space. "Probably the same family of raccoons," she'd said with a laugh. "They're quite industrious little creatures." Mrs. Chen was in her 70s, a retired librarian who had lived in the house next door for over 30 years. She was the kind of neighbor everyone wished they had, friendly but not intrusive, always willing to help but respectful of boundaries. She'd been the one to check on Jack's uncle during his final illness, and she kept an eye on the property during the months it had sat empty before Jack moved in. For the first few weeks, Jack ignored the sounds. He had more pressing concerns like fixing the leaky roof and updating the ancient electrical system. But as time went on, the scratching became more persistent and more puzzling. It wasn't random animal movement. There was a pattern to it, almost like someone was systematically exploring the space beneath the house. One evening, Jack decided to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and crawled under the house through the access panel in his basement. The crawl space was cramped and musty, filled with decades of dust and spider webs. He followed the sound of scratching toward the far corner of the house, where his kitchen was located above. What he found made him question his sanity. The dirt floor beneath his kitchen had been systematically excavated. Someone, or something, had dug a series of tunnels that extended from his crawl space toward Mrs. Chen's house. The tunnels were narrow but clearly man-made, reinforced with pieces of wood and metal that looked like they'd been salvaged from various sources. Jack's first thought was that he'd discovered some kind of abandoned root cellar or storage system from the property's earlier days. But as he examined the tunnels more closely, he realized they were recent. The wood used for reinforcement included modern pressure-treated lumber, and some of the metal supports had manufacturing dates from the past few years. Confused and increasingly disturbed, Jack followed one of the tunnels as far as he could manage in the cramped space. It led directly toward Mrs. Chen's house, disappearing beneath the foundation wall that separated their properties. The scratching sounds were louder here, and they were definitely coming from the other side of the wall. Jack backed out of the crawl space and sat in his kitchen, trying to make sense of what he'd discovered. The logical explanation was that Mrs. Chen had been doing some kind of construction project and the tunnels were related to that. Maybe she was installing a new water line or dealing with foundation problems. But why hadn't she mentioned it? And why would she need tunnels that extended onto his property? The next morning, Jack walked over to Mrs. Chen's house to ask about the construction work. She answered the door with her usual warm smile, but when he mentioned the tunnels, her expression changed to one of confusion. "Tunnels?" she said, adjusting her glasses. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear. I haven't done any construction work." Jack explained what he'd found, and Mrs. Chen's confusion seemed genuine. She invited him inside and led him down to her basement, which was clean and well organized, with no signs of recent excavation or construction. But as they stood talking, Jack heard the scratching sounds again, coming from somewhere beneath their feet. "There it is," Mrs. Chen said, looking relieved. "You hear it too? I was beginning to think I was imagining things. It's been going on for months now." They stood quietly, listening to the rhythmic scraping that seemed to be coming from directly below the basement floor. The sound was methodical, purposeful, like someone working with hand tools in a confined space. "Mrs. Chen," Jack said carefully, "if you're not doing construction and I'm not doing construction, then who's digging those tunnels?" The question hung in the air between them, and Jack saw his own growing fear reflected in Mrs. Chen's eyes. Someone had been systematically excavating beneath both of their houses for months, creating a network of tunnels for reasons they couldn't begin to imagine. Over the next few days, Jack conducted a more thorough investigation of his property. He discovered that the tunnel system was far more extensive than he'd initially realized. There were multiple branches extending in different directions, some leading toward the old barn on his property, others heading toward the woods that bordered the back of both houses. All of the tunnels showed signs of recent use, footprints in the dirt, fresh scratch marks on the walls, and in some places, evidence that someone had been storing supplies. The most disturbing discovery was a small chamber that had been carved out beneath the center of his house. It was just large enough for a person to sit upright, and it contained items that made Jack's blood run cold. Photographs of both his house and Mrs. Chen's house taken from various angles, detailed floor plans that showed the layout of both properties, and a notebook filled with handwritten observations about their daily routines. Someone had been living beneath their houses, watching them, studying them, and documenting their every move. Jack called the police immediately. The officers who responded were initially skeptical. The idea of someone living in tunnels beneath residential properties seemed far-fetched. But when Jack showed them the excavation and the evidence he'd found, their attitude changed quickly. A thorough search of the tunnel system revealed even more disturbing details. The person or persons responsible had created multiple entrance and exit points, including one that emerged in the woods behind the houses and another that came up inside the old barn. They'd been able to move freely around both properties without ever being seen above ground. The investigation expanded when police discovered that similar tunnel systems had been found beneath houses throughout the county over the past 2 years. In each case, the homeowners had reported strange scratching sounds and unexplained disturbances before discovering the underground network. The police believed they were dealing with someone who had been systematically targeting rural properties, possibly as part of an elaborate burglary operation or something even more sinister. But the tunneler was never caught. Despite setting up surveillance equipment and monitoring the tunnel systems, police found no trace of whoever had been living beneath the houses. The scratching sound stopped completely after the investigation began, and the tunnels showed no signs of recent use. Jack had the tunnels filled in and sealed, but he never felt completely safe in the house again. Mrs. Chen moved to a retirement community in town, unable to shake the feeling that someone might still be watching from below. The old farmhouse sat empty for months before Jack finally sold it at a significant loss. The new owners weren't told about the tunnels, the filled-in excavation wasn't visible, and Jack convinced himself that the problem had been solved. But sometimes, late at night when he was lying in his new apartment in town, Jack would think about the systematic way those tunnels had been dug, the careful planning that had gone into documenting his and Mrs. Chen's routines, and the fact that whoever had done it had never been caught. He wondered if somewhere else, in another quiet neighborhood, someone was lying awake listening to the sound of scratching beneath their floors, unaware that they were being watched by eyes in the darkness below.